Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Think and Reform podcast. My name is Luke Saint. Thank you so much for listening. And be sure to head over to futureofchristendom.org for announcements and events. You'll see debates we've had, and you'll see articles that we've posted. Soon we are going to be publishing the sessions from our 2026 Lancastrian Theonomy Symposium that we had just a couple weeks ago, the theme of which was capital punishment. So be sure to be checking out futureofchristendom.org and our YouTube channel for those updates and content. So today I'm going to be reacting to a couple of TikToks and Reels and things like that. Just want to do some reactions here. We're going to start off with Brian Sauve and a Reel that was released by him talking about women in roles of leadership. Here we go. Here's Brian.
So the way that we think about women's ministry, why do we have Bible teacher theology ladies? Where does the Bible authorize me as the pastor to say we need older women teaching systematic theology, precept studies through books of the Bible, when we have this huge need for older women to teach the younger women how to order their households, how to love their husbands and children well? Things like, I don't know, Titus 2 talks about, well, but we really want to do this study in Ephesians. We really want to do, okay, yeah, but I'm actually preaching every Sunday, verse by verse, through whole books of the Bible. Titus 2 here says, you should really be focused on this. And can I just tell you how many of those women remained at the church?
All of them?
None of them.
Oh,
They
wow.
all left.
I was 100% wrong.
For them, they had become quasi-elders and viewed it as their right and calling from God to be able to do this. They all left. The fruit since making that change, it's so good. So the way that we think about women's ministry.
Okay, did you catch that? Now, say what you want about Brian Sauve. I'm not really here to say this particular take is good or bad. The full content of what he's saying here is not really what I want to focus on. I'm more focused on something he said in there that is, in my opinion, a faux pas, according to the Nationalists. Let's listen again, just to the beginning here. Let's see if we can catch it here.
So the way that we think about women's ministry, why do we have Bible teacher theology ladies? Where does the Bible authorize me as the pastor to say we need older women teaching systematic theology, precept?
Okay, so according to Christian nationalism, that's a faux pas, what he just did there. Okay? Saying, where does the Bible authorize me? Using that phrase, right? That's a faux pas. You're not encouraged to say that in Christian nationalism. I mean, Webben and others, and I suspect even those guys down there in Utah, I suspect that they would, if you said to them, where does God authorize the magistrate to do X? They'd be like, oh, come on. I have a brain, right? To quote Joe Webben, I have a brain, right? I don't need God to authorize me, right? I don't need the law of God to authorize specifically so that, hey, I need a verse for everything, right? I mean, that's just a couple months ago, Joe Webben basically did a whole podcast, bemoaning the fact that people keep asking him for chapter and verse authorization on things. And he's like, his whole podcast was all about, well, you don't need one, all right? Just natural categories. You just need natural categories, okay? So stop with the whole where does the Bible authorize me crap. And here's Brian Sauve. I don't know if this is I say this respectfully, but I just wonder if there's communication between the two camps. You're not allowed to say that anymore, Brian. You can't say where does the Bible authorize me, right? Because that sounds like chapter and verse. Oh, I said it. There it is, chapter and verse. That's what he's saying. That's called chapter and verse theology. That's what the theonomists are doing, right? Those dumb, autistic, semi-retarded, theonomists, right? So here's Brian saying, when it comes to men and women's roles in the church, Brian's taken the chapter, I need chapter and verse approach, right? I think it's interesting when we get to the magistrate, hey, you don't need that anymore, Hey, goodbye. And I think for most Christian nationalists, or I should just say nationalists, for most nationalists, they do say, I do believe in chapter and verse. I'm a chapter and verse guy when it comes to the magistrate. And then when you show them chapter and verse, what the magistrate is supposed to do, they're like, never mind. And I think that was Webben. I think Webben had an idea of what he wanted, and he thought the Bible agreed with him on it. And then when he found out what the Bible actually said, he was like, never mind. And that's true for most Christians in this country, and Western Christians. They believe the Bible because they don't know what it says. If they found out what it says, they wouldn't believe it anymore. But I think a lot of Christian nationalists will be like, oh yeah, I'm a chapter and verse guy. And once they find out that the Bible does not authorize, to use Brian's phraseology here, where does the Bible authorize the magistrate to act like Stephen Wolfe's Christian Prince? And once they find out the Bible does not authorize the Christian Prince to act that way, I think they're suddenly like, no, never mind on the whole Bible stuff, nah. And I think most Christian nationalists who are like, yeah, I'm a chapter and verse guy. They're doing that because they don't know what the Bible says. And respectfully to Brian here, Brian, I'm sorry, but nationalism isn't saying that anymore, right? That's old hat. You're already behind the times. You can't be saying things like, "Where does the Bible authorize me?" Well, I guess you can when it has nothing to do with the magistrate, right? I guess you can, right? You can use that anywhere else except when it comes to magistrate. Then it's like, well, you're semi-retarded. You're autistic. So I just want to point that out there that I think nationalism needs to be just a little bit more consistent. Because if the leaders of the talking heads of Christian nationalism are getting frustrated, people keep asking for chapter and verse, and they're saying you don't need chapter and verse, you can just use your brain, natural categories, and blah, 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 then I think these women who started this beef with Brian get to say the same thing, no? No? And for my part, no, the answer is obviously not. Everyone needs chapter and verse. The pastor needs chapter and verse for his role. The men and women need chapter and verse for their role. And the magistrate needs chapter and verse for their role. It's quite an easy hermeneutic. It's very consistent. Come on in, the water's warm. So I wanted to, just when I saw that, I kind of, like my jaw hit the floor. I was really shocked that he was using that phraseology, and I'm pretty sure the Christian nationalists are trying to get rid of that phraseology. So that's the first one I want to talk about. The second one is, this is a quote that was shared in a Facebook group with which I'm a part. This is from the book King of Kings by James Baird, right? The Israelite civil laws do not bind us today, but they do teach us God's wisdom in matters of government. As a result, civil officials should study them carefully and work diligently to apply their general principles to the modern context, okay? Let me read that again. As a result, civil officials should study them, the laws of God, carefully and work diligently to apply their general principles to the modern context. But do you see how quickly the laws become principles here? Right? They weren't given as laws, right? There's principles. I'm not going to restrict them to just laws, right? There's wisdom and principles, as James Jordan has pointed out. It's not just that. James Jordan pointed out when I was listening to one of his presentations. He says, in the law of God, it's not just a law code. There's things in there that God says, like when man lends you his cloak, give it back to him at nighttime, because what's he supposed to sleep in? It's God adding wisdom and showing understanding and insight into these laws. So it's not just laws. There's principles and laws as well. But when it comes to people who say things like this, as a result, civil officials should study them carefully and work diligently to apply their general principles to the modern context. It's the same frustration I have when people bring up the ox. Do not muzzle the ox while treading out the grain. They're like, see, look, here's the principle of it, right? But they forget or haven't thought about, but it's still the question of it. Do you know it's still wrong to muzzle the ox while it treads out the grain, right? If I set up an ox and he was treading out the grain, It's still immoral for me to muzzle him while he's treading out the grain. That still applies. It's not just turned in from a law to a general principle. There's a law, and you can get principles from it at the same time. These things can coexist. They're not mutually exclusive. Do you understand? And the problem I have with this quote from Mr. Baird is that there's no laws left. None of them are laws. They're all just principles. Right? And now it's a smorgasbord. Take one from one place, from another. Right? They're just reduced. God's law is no longer a law. It's just principles. And I mean, can you imagine a Christian magistrate, getting a hold of the general equity principles of the dietary laws, and now our food is regulated into oblivion? Now the Christians, along with the statists, the baby murdering, pervert loving statists, are saying you're not allowed to sell raw milk. And then some knucklehead Christian magistrate gets a hold of the general equity of the law principle, and then he applies it to the food laws, and he's like, yeah, I see the general equity of you're not allowed to drink raw milk. See, there's this principle in there in the law, and once it becomes, the law, here's the law, and then I turn it into a principle, and then from there, it goes through my little factory, and by the time it comes out my factory, it's not a principle anymore, it's a new law that has nothing to do with the original one. Yes, I agree. You cannot sell raw milk because the general equity of the law, principle, blah, 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 blah. I've taken the principle, I've applied it to our modern context, and now you can't have raw milk. And if you think that's not happening now, I'm telling you it is. People are doing it right now. And this is one I often see all the time. Sixth commandment, you shall not kill. That means that the state needs to control the roads. I'm not joking you, that's the argument. We have guys out there with chainsaws, right? We got guys out there working on power lines. We have people out there blowing stuff up. And somehow, the sixth commandment means that the state needs to control the roads. Oh, but everyone, you with the chainsaw, you're good. No, we don't need to control that. I say this all the time. The general equity problem, the roadblock that theonomists need to get over, the general equity principle is that you take God's law, you turn it into principles, and then you take the principles that you get from that, or not. Maybe you didn't get it from the God's law. Maybe you just got it from your own stupid Aristotelian philosophy, and somehow you can magically tie it back to God's law somehow. And your principles become law. And suddenly we're not doing the law of God anymore. Suddenly we're answering to you and your stupid laws. God didn't just give them principles. There's laws in there. Actual laws. They're not just principles. There are laws. Right? For the magistrate. For the magistrate to follow. He's not allowed to say, whatever. They're just principles. 3 witnesses or not. Hands of the witnesses shall be first against them or not. Oh, but the 10 Commandments are still binding, kind of. This is the kind of silliness. The kind of silliness. I mean, that in my opinion, with respect to Mr. Baird, it bad hermeneutics and an unwillingness to go to the law for wisdom, but rather trying to bring my wisdom to the law. This is what you get. Rather than trying to reverse engineer, okay, what does God teach me about the government? What's the responsibility and the role of the government? You start with the classical liberalism or the Reformed tradition nonsense, and then you bring it to the God's law. You try to shove God's law into it. And then it's just like this deformed blob of a theology. It's a frustration of mine. This keeps happening. God didn't just give us principles. And when these politicians get a hold of these principles, they make the most stupid and dumb and idiotic conclusions from them, and now we have to live by them. We're suffering because of them. But please stop turning God's law into principles. Stop trying to get the principles, and now we have to all live by your stupid principles. the problem of the general equity principle is God's law is that when people get a hold of it, we're not dealing with the principles of God's law. We're dealing with your interpretation of those principles. And you've made your interpretation of those principles the new law. And we're not following God's law anymore. We're following your law. This is an absolute hurdle that theonomists need to get over. It is a stumbling block to us because we're just natural law junior. We're just natural law's little redheaded brother. We're not going to play their game as well as they do. The next one I want to talk about is this one right here. This was I saw this video. I really like this guy, Ray William Johnson. Ray William Johnson. He's got he does true crime little videos, and he usually keeps them around 10 minutes long. And he's a very popular YouTuber, and I'm not sure if he's a TikToker, but his stuff is very well done. He's very consistent, very interesting. So he does a little video here of these kids in Kroger, and I want to talk about how God's law would interact with this.
Local mall. So these turds, one day they're hanging out at the local mall, causing trouble and just being turds. Then, boom, they get kicked out. But they're not done messing around. So they go to a nearby Kroger and they all start causing a ruckus in there, being loud, breaking wine bottles, and just being awful. And at some point, the Kroger employees notice all this and they call the police. Minutes later, some police officers show up and they go to confront them, politely.
Y'all was breaking stuff, y'all done broke wine bottles. It's on camera, they done caught y'all breaking stuff. Where y'all parents?
So there's a little bit of back and forth between them and the officers tell them to leave the store. But these guys are just not taking this seriously.
Time to leave. Get up, man. Time to go. I heard you. That way. Out. Let's go. I don't worry about it. I'm not worried about your shoe. You can tie that outside. Let's go.
Yeah, they have no respect for anyone. Like, one of the teens gets into it with this woman who looks like a customer on the way out.
You ain't working nowhere.
Come on. Let's go.
You ain't working nowhere.
Let's go. Time to go.
You ain't working nowhere.
Are you his parent?
I'm not his parent.
All right, then let's go.
Yeah, his parent. Yeah.
Let's go.
Now, this kid in particular, we'll call him Little Brother. And Little Brother is the biggest problem here. He just isn't listening. And this is where things really start to go south.
I'm going to put you in handcuffs in a minute. Do you understand that?
Don't touch him again.
Excuse me, he's going to listen or he's going to go in handcuffs. Now let's go.
I'm not even doing that. I'm finna walk up.
I'm trying to get my... No, put your hands behind your back.
Okay. So the problem here, I mean, should be obvious to everyone, right? The problem and the solution should be obvious to everyone, right? But our minds are so affected by statism. We're like, what do we do? What do we do in this problem, right? Because as soon as you lay a finger on somebody in our culture, with our society, our laws, our system, as soon as you touch somebody, just put your finger on them. You know what that is? That's not you touching them, okay? That's not you making contact, all right? That's not you trying to do the right thing. That's assault. As soon as you touch someone, put a finger on them. That's assault. That's lawsuit, and you're in the wrong because of our stupid statist system. And so we think like that, right? We as Americans, we see this and we're like, oh my goodness, well, you can't do anything because that's assault, right? But that's just thinking like statists. We're thinking like statists. Now, if we had God's law as the law of the land, not God's principles, but God's law as the law of the land, right? Because any knucklehead can take the principle of Lex Talionis and still come up with blah, 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 blah. I mean, if A, then B, then B, then C, then C, then D. Oh, yes, putting a finger on somebody is assault. Anybody can do that, all right? That's not hard. That's very easy to do that. But if we just had God's law and no man-made laws, then this would not be a problem, because the owner of the store would be able to pull out a paintball gun and just start spraying people until they got out. And that would be no lawsuit. That would not be a problem at all. And these kids wouldn't even do this in the first place, because they would know the owner of the store is allowed to defend his property if he feels that it's under assault, which it was from these kids, from these, teenagers. But that's the solution. That's the solution to the problem. The owner of the private property, he gets to make the rules, and he gets to set the contract between, if you want to come into my property, you have to behave yourself. And if I want you gone, I can make you gone. Just pull out a paintball gun. If there's a problem, just start spraying them until they get out. That's the solution. No need to call the police officers. And this wouldn't even happen, because these kids would know, okay, if we start messing up, we're going to get in trouble and we could get hurt. This is dangerous for us. If we start messing with this guy's property and this business, it's dangerous for us. We're at some point, you're risking your life. You're risking your life, because in God's system, you're allowed to defend your private property unto death if you feel you're at risk. But since we're in our status systems, the employees are like, well, we can't do anything. So we have to call the people who can. And even when they get there, they can barely do anything. And we look at these problems and we're like, oh my goodness, what do we do? Because we're so filled with status law and status reasoning, status logic, general equity principle nonsense, that we look at a situation that is quite clear what the right thing to do here is. And we can't even find the solution to it. We can identify the problem, but we can't identify the solution. It's just very frustrating when you see this kind of silliness going on. And the magistrates, if I can call them that, these police officers, I mean, honestly, should be teaching these kids a lesson. They should be wailing on them. Give them a 1-2 punch. That'll teach them a lesson. When the family, under God's system, if the family fails to properly restrain a child, and they go out and they try to take that disrespect of their family to other people, God's law doesn't protect the disrespecter. It protects the disrespectee. And the magistrate only gets involved when injustice occurs, right? And somebody acting up on someone else's private property, and if they get beat up and thrown out and they get hurt in the process, no injustice has occurred unless you can prove it in court. But when you take this before a judge and say, oh no, he hurt me. Well, why? Well, because I wouldn't leave his private property. Well, what happened? Well, I tried to ask him nicely and they wouldn't leave. And so I took matters in my own hands, and then I kicked him out myself. Okay, case closed. But since the judge is not bound by status man-made law, he's only bound by God's law. He doesn't have to. He's not forced to call, oh, well, that's assault. You're not allowed to do that. He's a child. He's a minor. How dare you? He doesn't know. There's none of that the judge has to deal with. He can just use his common sense and say, okay, I see what happened here. Case closed. Wouldn't even appear before a magistrate because there's no case. But this is the problem of status logic and reasoning and status man-made law. We come up to problems that are easily solvable without getting tax dollars involved. And suddenly through our silly man-made status nonsense, now we have to deal with these problems in a way that is absolutely stupid. You have adults there that are employees of the establishment, and they can't do anything because that's assault. And these kids are literally breaking their stock. They're smashing wine bottles and they're being a disruption. We can't do anything. Why? Because it's illegal to do the right thing. Well, how did it become illegal to do the right thing? General equity principles. This is why that you have these riots inside these CVSs and these Rite Aids, in the cities, right? They run in there, they start stealing stuff, and the employees can't do anything because it's illegal to do anything. And the insurance would rather have them not do anything because it's too expensive to pay for lawsuits. And because we tried to take God's law and turn it into general equity principles, now we can't have nice things anymore. Now we can't have stores where you can just walk around and get stuff off the shelf. Now you have to call someone over and get a key. Or now the whole store gets shut down because they can't operate in these places because we try to be nicer than God. We'll move on now to one that my friend Tom sent me here. This one's a little frustrating to me.
What would you tell someone who knows exactly?
A little frustrating to me because of just how far is Doug Wilson going to fall? Not necessarily fall, if I could rephrase that, but kind of like, where is his trajectory going? I guess is what I'm saying. Where's this arc going to land? Because I'm just like, it's not landing on God's law. And I wonder about his legacy now. I just have to wonder after things like this. Remember the Doug Wilson that was just, no quarter November, right? That was kind of like that no quarter November attitude was kind of like his whole ministry. That kind of summed up his whole ministry. Right. So let's check out what he has to say here. What should ICE do now?
Current events. We've got this immigration conflict in our country, things like Minneapolis, which have happened recently. And the question is, if you had the president's ear, if he was taking your advice, there's kind of two paths that you could see taking. One is like win the battle with brute force, more agents, press through all of the disruptions and agitation and deport everybody. Or another argument would be it's gotten too hot, too heavy, people are getting squeamish. So take the calculated loss, withdraw, and live to fight another day. Maybe which one of those, or is there a third one that you would think of as the right path when it comes to that immigration issue?
Backing away is not going to win over the swing voters because
what in the world are we doing talking about the swing vote? What in the world? Is this a pastor or a politician? The swing vote? Oh no, the Gallup poll says this. Better check your midterms. What are we doing here? What are we doing here? What happened to thus says the Lord? He calls himself a theonomist. Is this theonomy? Is this God's law? The swing vote. Quick, factor in the swing vote. What are we doing here? Is this the legacy of all that Bible talk, Doug? Is this the legacy? The swing vote? All that talk about God's law, God's righteousness, God's justice, the no quarter of November stuff, and now we're talking just like the pagans. Who cares about the swing vote, Doug? Don't we care about what's right and what's wrong? Now, I wouldn't just say this for any clip that I see, but given Doug's history of his total take no prisoners, I stand on the word of God, I'm not ashamed of it, and now we're talking about the damn swing vote. How did that become a factor into our thinking? We're playing the pagans' games by the pagans' rules. What is this? The swing vote? It's asinine.
If I could illustrate this with a kid that you're trying to teach to take a nap, and you put the baby down and he cries for 45 minutes, and you've go get him. The lesson being learned here is, okay, 45 minutes is what it takes. I'll go at least that long next time.
Yeah.
And so my advice in this is, look, you have to finish this. You have to win. And you can't just retreat, because the reason these riots and this unrest and these protests are being staged is because they usually work. And if you do what they are wanting to get you to do, then you're asking for more the next time. If you go away from Minneapolis having taken a loss, you're asking for the same thing to happen in Baltimore, Chicago, and LA. And so you need to win, and you need to win decisively. And
so that means send more troops, call it the National Guard. You would say that even though the optics of that, a lot of Americans get real squeamish about that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You would say push through it. You've got to lance that boil.
Yeah. This is one of those things where we have to say, when we hear that phrase, a lot of Americans are saying, I hear a lot of other Americans saying, this is exactly what I voted for. This is how on earth are you going to deport 13 million people with no dislocations and no turmoil? And that's why the open borders time during Biden's era was so wicked, because you're asking the next administration to unscramble the egg in the hope that they won't even try, right? And so this is a challenging, difficult thing to do. I would double down, triple down. Now, I do think, I do believe that there are some tactical adjustments that they could make.
So I just can't, I can't help it. I love Doug Wilson. I do. I just love his whole attitude. But I have to say, I'm just disappointed at this. Ever since Trump got elected in, 2022, I've just been, 2024. I've been so disappointed. Because now we're talking about optics. Now we're talking about the swing vote. And now we're talking about campaign promises and deportations. 13 million people, whose many of which I would guess the majority of which, they're not being judged by biblical standards. They're being judged by American law. And I'm just disappointed a pastor judging other people through American law. Right? Now, I mean, I get that he thinks that coming into this, I'm pretty sure he thinks that it's a sin to come into a nation illegally, right? But that's, again, judging people according to American law, right? I'm here to tell you that that's a made-up crime. That's a made-up sin. And I'm pretty sure he did a podcast recently where he was like, we got to stop with the made-up stuff. Stop with the made-up sins and the made-up crimes, right? But coming into a country illegally is a made-up sin, and it's a made-up crime. I don't understand what's the difference between coming to a country illegally as an immigrant versus being born here. What's the difference? You have another person coming in. Do we know his character? No. Do we know his future? No. Do we know his past? No. How's that relevant? I think an argument for documenting immigrants is an argument for documenting babies. Report to the government your child. And I wonder if Doug would think it's a sin for people to not report their child being born to the government. Is it a sin to not be documented, even for American citizens, people born here? If you're born here from long line of Americans, and you don't report that, your children's birth, you have 10 children and you report none of them to the government. Is that a sin? If you say, well, no, that's not a sin, then my question is, how is it a sin for someone to just walk in here and not report themselves to the government? How is that a sin? What's the difference? Oh, we have too many people. Now you're making an argument for controlling how many people are allowed to be born here. What's the difference? Oh, well, they're bad and we're not. That's a lie. That's a lie. Now, they have different customs. And especially those people, those Muslims and a lot of the third world people, for some reason, they think, they like to rape people. And Americans like to rape people. However, Americans generally frown on rape. And I know a lot of these countries, they kind of accept that as a way of life. Well, I suspect a lot of these countries, they kind of accept it as a way of life, especially the people, these rape gangs that are going around. But the problem is not people coming over here and raping people. That's not the problem, because Americans rape people as well. The problem is that we don't have God's law that punish rapists. That's the problem. People who rape people get sometimes months in prison. The problem is our justice system. It's not people coming in here. That's not the problem. The problem is our justice system that rewards that behavior and doesn't punish it properly. If we punish that behavior properly, they wouldn't want to come in here. But as much as I love Doug, I'm just so disappointed that he just sounds like, whenever it comes to the civil government now, he just sounds more like a politician than he does a pastor. He's talking about politics. And I look at him, I'm like, what's the difference between him and like your basic senator? What's the difference when it comes to politics? He's not standing with 2 feet on God's law anymore like he used to. It's just been disappointing. Talking about the swing vote. He's got pressure from places that I can't even imagine. So I don't want to say that if I was in his shoes, I would do any better. But man, I was really hoping that his unapologetic stance of the scriptures would have been applied to the magistrate. And now it's like we're not hearing anything more about God's law from him. We're just hearing more about, here's how we can negotiate with the president, and here's how the president needs to win the swing vote and deport these people. It's been disappointing. And I was hoping for more, I guess. And I just hope his legacy is not affected negatively. And, to say nothing of Hegseth, I don't know enough about Hegseth to really comment on him, but I guess I was just hoping for, like Hegseth's Secretary of War, he's got the president's ear. Who's got, I guess people thought, maybe he doesn't, people thought that Doug would have Hegseth's ear, right? Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he doesn't talk to him at all. Maybe Hegseth views Doug as a pariah. I don't know what their relationship is, but I was hoping, that there would be some sort of theonomic influence. But every time I hope for this kind of stuff, it never happens in the upper echelons. Never. You can't even get it from your own sheriff. It's so corrupt. And we abandon all principle and integrity once we get our guy in office. As soon as he gets in office, he starts abandoning everything, just like Hegseth did when it came to women in war. Man, that was embarrassing. But that kind of set the tone, did it not? Kind of set the tone for everybody. Last one I want to do is one I saw that is more cultural commentary, but I thought it was interesting, and I like to talk about this kind of stuff. Okay. All right, here we go.
I need a show of hands. Do you think colors like this look dated? And do you feel like coloring like this looks more modern or authentic? Because I have a broad criticism I want to make, a trend I want to stop seeing even in the movies I like, and I don't know whether to lay this criticism at the filmmaker's feet or whether you're complicit here too. That's right, I don't know if we're friends, but we're gonna find out. So this doesn't need to be this colorless. But increasingly for the last 40 years, and very prevalently for the last 25, we have gotten these desaturated, colorless presentations of antiquity. Let's say we're setting a movie in medieval times. It seems we no longer want to see dye that looks fresh, or a castle that is built in recent generations and is kept in good condition. And especially, we no longer want to see Mediterranean people who have recently painted something. Instead, we want to see things looking aged, minimal, stripped of color, because color didn't exist until the mid-20th century, don't you know? And I'm sick of it. Why is color a dated element in film? I often wonder if a shift occurred in the age of the internet where we now suddenly believe that everyone before maybe like 1970 was just stupid. Concepts like chemistry, engineering, hygiene, math couldn't possibly have existed before I was born. So a movie like Amadeus, if it was made today, can't depict Mozart in shiny new clothes and with a clean, washed face. No, because unless we're talking about Bridgerton, the outfits in modern period pieces need to be colorless, frayed as if nobody knew how to darn anything, with grimy, soot-covered faces because people didn't bathe enough back then. Forgetting the fact that if men were shaving their faces, they were then also certainly washing them. Even comparably more colorful movies, like The Green Knight, still have this antique quality, as if everything needs to look aged and faded and antique within its own context when it wouldn't be antique to them. It would be fresh and new. It reminds me of this story an artist once told me of when he was asked to make a bowl like one Jesus would have washed his feet in. So the artist did the research on how bowls back then were made the bowl, gave it to the people, and they said, no, this isn't right. It looks too new. It's not going to work. This is a modern bowl. Because what they wanted was something aged, worn down, faded, broken. Because in 2026, we don't want to see someone from the past have a bowl that looks fresh from a kiln. It needs to look fresh from the dig site. This is a picture from Ben-Hur, by the way. I did not go looking for pictures of any bowls. But I think the trend of adding filters and desaturation and grime tells the audience that people in the past were dirty, sad, confused, unrelatable, distanced from us in some way. And look, I don't know if it's reflective of the rise in conspiratorial thinking, of anti-intellectualism and the modern assumption that people from before the year 1970 couldn't tie their shoe, but at the very least, it's not this colorful. And do we really want to leave colors like this in the past? I need a show of hands. Do you...
Okay, so an observation by this TikToker. Why are colors in films now, every period piece, everything's muted, right? All these filters, there's very little color. And people are dirty, and everything looks gritty. Everything just looks miserable. And this is, I think this is a worldview from Hollywood and from the left that you cannot talk about how good things were back then. And I remember somebody did a very brilliant video. I forget his name, but he did a very brilliant video on the movie Pleasantville and how basically from that time, from Pleasantville, and this is involved too, because Pleasantville is a movie where two teenagers get sucked into their favorite Leave It to Beaver-like sitcom, and is black and white. And once they bring corruption, what the liberals would call and leftists would call like enlightenment, right, which would mean sexual perversion and sexual perversion. And what they would call free thinking, but would be basically intolerant thinking. Once they bring that into the world becomes colorful, right? And this goes with this idea that everything before my time was ignorant, bad, degenerate, degraded, and silly, and backwards and barbaric. Right? That's why they have to show these movies. Every period piece basically doesn't have any sort of sunshine. If you notice, every time that there's a day, you're outside, it's gray, right? That's the Green Knight was like that. There was never a sunshiny day. right? Fury, that tank movie, stupid, dumb tank movie. Everything was overcast. Every day was overcast, right? You go back and you watch The Last of the Mohicans. Beautiful colors in that movie. The Patriot, beautiful colors in that movie. But that was still done from a time where they were like, yeah, the past is pretty cool. There were some really great things about the past. But since there's this idea among Hollywood now that everything before my time was backwards and barbaric because they were all racists and they were sexists. So I can't show that time positively. I can't put color or beauty back into that time. I have to show it as weird and bizarre. And maybe they thought it was beautiful, but you as a viewer don't, because look, there's no color in it, right? And everyone's dirty, and they're probably doing this for a dumb reason, right? It's the muted tones and the colorless scenery is not an artistic desire. It's a commentary. They're commentating on it. They're preaching at you, right? They're not just saying, we think this is good art. They're saying everything in this time cannot be shown positively because these were bad people. They're all bad. They're all bad people. The new Robin Hood movie they're making with what's his name? Why do I want to say Gene Hackman? Hugh Jackman. The new Robin Hood movie they're making, Hugh Jackman, is this gritty, like bloody, violent, dirty, filthy, dark movie about how Robin Hood really wasn't a good guy. And this is not an artistic desire. This is a commentary. They're preaching at you. And they're trying to destroy folk tales, right? Because you cannot receive wisdom. That's the message. You can't receive wisdom from this time because they were bad people. So don't look to them for wisdom. So that's why that you see in these movies the colorlessness, the lifelessness. They're trying to suck the life out of it because they hate that time. Why? Because everyone was a racist and everyone was ignorant, right? They didn't have science like we do, right? They didn't have, evolutionary, Darwinism like we do, right? So they're stupid and they're dumb. So the whole desire is not for an aesthetic. The aesthetic is irrelevant. They're preaching at you and they're trying to tell you that everyone before my time was ignorant and a racist and a sexist. And I cannot show that time positively or with beauty because that means I'm elevating or I am saying something positive about that time. And I can't do that because everyone was an ignorant racist. Now, that's mostly to do with European period pieces now, right? European period pieces and American period pieces, you have to show grittiness, people clawing, violent, and, pastors at pulpits pointing fingers at people, and everything was just dirty and filthy, and it just looked like a terrible life and a terrible time, and there's no bright sunshiny day, and it was just disgusting. And, you have to do that because everybody was a racist before me, right? That's the goal. That's why they show these things like that. They have to take the color and the life out of this time because they're not concerned about the aesthetic. They are concerned about showing you that everyone back then was a bad person. Everybody, even the good people, were bad. Women are always victimized in these movies now, right? And everything they're all like basically viewed as tragedies. Every period piece basically now is viewed as a tragedy. Unless you race swap. If you race swap people, then you can show it positively. Then you can do a period piece positively, but you have to race swap. That's the price you have to pay. Sorry. So I want to show this scene from, rather than, cursing the darkness, I'd like to light a candle here. This is, I'm sorry if you're listening, but this is a scene from True Grit, one of my favorite all-time movies. But let's just watch this real quick. Sorry for the bad sound quality. I don't know why it does that.
How much are you paying for cotton? 9.5 for low middling and 10 for ordinary.
We got most of ours out early. Sold to the Woodson Brothers in Little Rock for 11 cents.
Then I suggest you take the balance of it to the Woodson Brothers.
You know, I just love this movie so much because the opening scene of this movie, even though she shows up for a hanging, the Coen brothers, and this, I guess this is like 2010 when this movie was made, the Coen brothers still showed the quaint living. I guess they were in, or were they in Arkansas? The quaint small town, like the positive side of the West or the South, whichever one you want to put Arkansas at. And looking at the scene, she's in this shop, and there's color in here. We got yellows, we got browns, these deep, rich browns, right? Nobody, I mean, these people look plain and ordinary, but nobody looks sad. Nobody looks ignorant, right? This isn't, even though it's called True Grit, it's not this gritty, survive by the skin of your teeth, and everyone's just weird and killing each other, and there's blood everywhere, which is the way most Westerns are portrayed now. And, you know, there's soft music in the background. The court scene from this movie is probably one of the best movie scenes I've ever seen of all time. And in that scene, there's, you know, the very warm sunshine is coming through the windows. The place looks very cozy. It looks like a place that looks welcoming and inviting. It looks normal. It looks American. It looks like something you would expect to find back in that time, right? And the people, they look nice. In the beginning of the scene, people are walking around town. They don't look miserable. It looks like everything's clean. It looks like, hey, this doesn't look so bad. This looks like a really nice place. And I get it. Not everything was nice back then, right? But there were people who moved out there and made it nice, right? Some of the buildings are still standing, and they look pretty nice. But I that's one of the reasons why I love this movie, because in the beginning, the Coen brothers established this very welcoming. There's welcoming aesthetic. There's sunshine. People look comfortable. Everyone's clothed. Right? There's normal people. There's weird people, just like in your world. Right? Not everyone's weird. And I miss these period pieces where they tried to view the world through the eyes of the people that lived back at that time, and not through the eyes of some, you know, woke producers and script writers with $25,000 haircuts. I miss those days, and I look forward to the day when we get them back, either through Reformation or AI. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for listening to the Think and Reform podcast. Head over to futureofchristendom.org for more content and more podcasts. And we'll see you guys next time. And remember, my friends, think and reform.